The Legend of Zelda is one of the first games where you literally play a map. And what a map it is. Today we might see chunky graphics, limited color palette, and a blocky world with awkward screen transitions. But in '86, this game was revolutionary, and it affects the games you play today way more than you might realize. So let's take a walk through the development and implementation of the maps that make up Zelda, and learn to appreciate an aspect of this game you might never have thought much about. In the middle of the '80s, adventure and RPG games were already a thing. We had Adventure in '79, the Ultima series throughout the '80s, Dragon Quest in '86, and quite a few others. Many of these featured the concept of a player moving through the world and then encountering monsters or solving puzzles. Zelda drew heavily on these other games. Miyamoto, the genius behind Zelda, Mario, and every game you've ever liked, has acknowledged the importance of adventure in inspiring him. It's obvious that the concept of running around an overworld is borrowed from this earlier game. What's really special about Zelda is that it kind of brought together the best of multiple other systems. The combat takes place action style directly on screen in Zelda, but you're still playing on top of a map, like in Dragon Quest. Now, originally Zelda wasn't even going to have an overworld. It was going to be a pure action game with interconnected rooms of puzzles and enemies. But, as Miyamoto explained later, we wanted to play above ground too. They wanted to explore the world of Link, not just the dungeons. The thing about having an overworld map that you can play on is that you start to get the feeling like you're taking part in an entire world. Things are interconnected. Miyamoto described it as a miniature garden that you can put into a drawer and revisit anytime you like. The map and the fact that you move around it, change it, and get to know it means that you explore in this game. You make the adventure your own. A map like this one encourages a sense of non-linearity. You get a sword and a warning, and then you're on your own in Zelda. You have to be willing to explore and discover even at the risk of dying. And this open world was pretty big too. When Takashi Tezuka and Miyamoto sat down to create this world, they used what they called long paper and literally drew it out by hand, area by area. That gave us this strangely rectangular shape of the overworld, 16 by 8 blocks, making a total of 128 overworld screens with some 20 or so additional screens for dungeons and other bits. But this map couldn't be held at once on screen, not as an interactive piece. The NES cartridge that contained the entire world of Hyrule had just 128 kilobytes of memory, less than one modern photo. A map like Dragon's Quest could be on screen because the action didn't take place on it. But in Zelda, you can burn bushes. Enemies live on the screen. You can bomb walls. So they had to work around technical constraints to keep this map feeling alive. They basically used a coordinate system, not unlike today's digital mapping, to place reused sprites and save player interacted elements so they'd appear on screen at the right place. This way, they minimized asset storage, avoiding any pre-rendering and saving of screen data. Dungeon maps were also used repeatedly. That moment of waiting when you exit one screen and enter another seems a little clunky today, but it actually created a rhythm to the game, and it made it able to be so large and interactive as they unloaded and reloaded assets. Speaking of how big it is, just how big is the Zelda overworld to Link? Well, if we take the overworld as its great grid, 16 by 8, we can see that each screen is 16 by 11 tiles, about 176 tiles. We can more or less assume that Link's around 5 feet tall, since he's not an adult or a child. So for the sake of ease, let's just say that each tile's 5 feet squared. We also have some additional rooms, like I said before, around 20 more, probably more than that. But for the sake of ease, let's say it's 150 tiles across the game. This means the general size of the game is, the calculation you see on screen right now, which ends up at around 0.06 squared kilometers. Now, if I put that on Central Park, you can see that we're looking at around 4 or 5 city blocks, at least to Zelda. So for little kids, what's cool about that is it's kind of the size of the world. It's the size of your little neighborhood play area that you knew like the back of your hand. It's just the right size of the world for Link to be living in. It's still big enough that you can get lost and even frustrated at times, but then this was part of the design too. See, Miyamoto wanted people to have some trouble with the game, so they'd have to work together. You have to remember at this time that gaming was pretty social. It was a collaborative kind of culture in an era that came before the internet. Magazines and schoolyards were full of kids exchanging hand-drawn maps, sharing secrets, figuring out strategy guides for themselves. Nintendo included a physical map with the North American release of Zelda, but sealed it with a warning note. You should only use the map and strategic tips as a last resort. And people were already used to making their own maps. You have to remember there was a culture of hand-drawing maps at this time for adventure games, particularly like Zork, for instance. These didn't come with any maps, so you had to make them. So the design of Zelda's world played right into this. Kids and adults alike drew their own maps, marking the secrets, marking the heart containers, shops, dungeon entrances, secrets, and bosses. One of the big parts of the unmapped world was the dungeons. They weren't part of the overworld, so even on the Zelda maps that came with it, they weren't there. But this is where maybe the most revolutionary and underappreciated innovations of this first Zelda games is. It's the mini-map. See, dungeon maps in Zelda weren't given to the player, but you could discover them, and you could also discover a compass. Then they would appear up here at the top of the screen, and finally you could actually know where you were going. Now, mini-maps had existed before, but they were very rare in the RPG genre. Usually they were like radar systems, or like we see in Defender, it's a way to see what the world is looking like ahead and where enemies are. Zelda brought the concept to the mainstream in a puzzle-like mechanism. It made the dungeons more secretive, more progressive, and larger. When you found the map in the dungeon, it was like relief, and you accomplished something, because the maze of rooms became comprehensible, at least a little, and when you found the compass, you could finally locate the boss and some treasure. This inclusion of a minimap made the sense of playing the world deeper, and made mapping part of the game mechanics, not just something you did on paper when you paused the game. No other adventure game to this point had really implemented a discoverable minimap system like this. It was a great solution to the problem of player disorientation while maintaining a sense of exploration and discovery. Now, on top of all this innovation, something I didn't even know as a kid, there was a New Game Plus mode to Zelda. You could start again if you beat the game with a save called Zelda, and you get an overworld with things mixed around and changed, so you had to explore the map all over again, but now it was harder. So we see here just how important knowing the map and playing the map was to this game. The influence of Zelda's original map and this concept of exploring the overworld is hard to overstate. Its DNA can be found practically in every single open world games that's followed, from Elder Scrolls to the intricate world of Dark Souls. It wasn't the first to use many of these concepts, but it brought them into the mainstream and made exploration and adventure a viable way to play and build a game. It made playing on an overworld map with dungeons part of gaming like it never had been before. The idea that the game world, that the map, should reward exploration rather than just serving as a backdrop for some kind of progression, this was Zelda's biggest innovation. It suggested the environment could be a character in the adventure, that there could be personality and secrets on what was before a backdrop. Even as the series evolved through the decades since then, from the parallel worlds of A Link to the Past to the 3D world, giant world of Breath of the Wild, it's always maintained that philosophy that the world itself is a place of wonder, mystery, and discovery. So today, when we're playing huge open world games with landscapes that stretch to the horizon, it's easy to forget that this began with this tiny 8-bit world that could fit into just a few city blocks of real-world space, at least if you're the size of Zelda. But that little garden planted the seeds for a new approach to game design. So the next time you're wandering the big landscapes of your favorite open world games, discovering secrets and making your own way through the world, remember this little green guy on the simple blocky map who made it possible. Remember the drawer that still holds that miniature garden, a garden that grew to change gaming forever. Thanks for watching.